morning.
Good morning.
This morning I'm talking about tests on the path of life. It's very interesting to think about tests. Usually tests for the, let's say the average person is passing a test in school. And as we get into the college years, the tests are more intense and the results of the test have a greater effect on us than when we were young. But that's not the kind of test I'm going to be talking about today. Today's talk is important for those of us that are striving on the path of transformation. Those of us who are, as it is said in Agni Yoga, striving towards self-perfectment through transmutation and transformation. Now, in the esoteric community, these individuals are recognized as disciples. So I'm going to be using this term today. And the focus being on the test the disciples experience from the time they were born to the time that they pass. So these are obviously different types of tests, but I like to, the school, but I like to think that the tests that we experienced in our academic education were symbols and helping us to recognize that tests are important. And of course, I was thinking back when I was attending the University of Iowa, the tests there were so difficult for me to pass, and I would have to prepare for days before the actual test took place. And that is no different than the tests of discipleship, that even though we may not realize that we are undergoing a test, and that's true, that some tests that we are given, we don't know that it's a test, but we're being watched to see how we pass or fail on that test. So no matter whether we're in grade school or in the university or on the path of discipleship, we're going to experience tests that we need to prepare ourselves for. So let me talk a little bit about discipleship. This is a term that some of the older members of the esoteric community would like to change. They would like to change the language of the nomenclature of the teaching. And in some cases I really agree, but in other cases I don't. And changing the term disciple, I cannot agree with. We have other terms like light bearers and torch bearers, but the word disciple is so definitive of action, of consciousness, of a level of consciousness. And it is a word that is found in all scriptures, no matter what the religion. So I just take this word disciple as significant to our soul. And when we have a language that is significant to our soul, then our soul will understand it spiritually. So why remove a word or words that are significant to the soul from ancient times? So I hope you won't be offended by me talking and using the word disciple today. So a disciple is a person who has a vision for liberation, a vision for happiness and greater perfection of humanity, and they work for it. They dedicate themselves to that vision. They sacrifice themselves for it. Whatever they do, physically, emotionally, mentally, through their words, through their emotions, through their actions, they try to actualize their vision. So this is a word that is synonymous with the word of a disciple, or let's say the environment of a disciple. The environment of a disciple, within the environmental life of a disciple, they are visionaries. And what's the purpose of that vision, if not to serve hierarchy, if not to bring forth and manifest the unfolded plan of hierarchy for humanity? So, a disciple must be a visionary. A vision is more than an idea. It is like a magnet which is going to pull that disciple up toward higher level of existence. It is an intuitive perception. Listen to this. The vision of a disciple is an intuitive perception of their life purpose, and it relates to their future. Future, not the future of next week or next year or 50 years from now, but their infinite future. So the vision, this intuitive perception of vision that a disciple has, is related to the continuity of their life. So this is why it's important to understand that vision is not an idea. It is something greater than an idea. And like I said, it's a magnet. A vision is a fragment of the disciples' plan for their soul, which is and will come into actualization in due time. So testing is the process of preparation to bring vision into manifestation. It is a portion of the hierarchical plan which in due time will manifest in the disciples' environment and turn into a reality. The visions of a disciple are projected images of achievement that are reflected on the surface or the energy field of the spiritual triad. It is something toward which a disciple strives and is part of the plan of their soul. Now, discipleship. Discipleship is considered a strenuous tension, agony, labor, and burden. This can be true occasionally, but the overriding character of discipleship is joy. And why is that? Because discipleship is a great honor. It is a service. Discipleship is a service to the higher, to the greater. It's a service for one humanity. It's an opportunity to experience closeness to the great teachers. It is a process of going toward light, toward the real, toward immortality and synthesis. This is discipleship. So you can just tell by what I'm saying, a disciple and discipleship is. Why would we want to change that word? Being a musician, words are significant to me by sound and color. And some words have very little sound and very little color, and other words have depth of color and strength of tonality, a strength that reverberates on all levels of consciousness. I was thinking about how my own teacher, Torquem, when he would speak to us, every single word he said had a resonance with it that reverberated within our whole being. And even though he passed in 1997, I still hear his voice. I still hear his words. I still understand only in part the depth of some of those words, which all was the manifestation of his vision. So when we think about our own discipleship, we want to realize that we are living a life that's different from the common man. And therefore, our language, our emotion, our physicality, our actions, even the manifestation of our ideas carry a weight, carry a power, carry a resonance with them that the average person doesn't carry with themselves. Why not? They're not yet prepared. And in that preparation, it means that they either have taken tests and failed them, or those tests have not been given to them yet because they're not ready. A disciple is not an island unto themselves, but is part of a group disciple. A group disciple is a group of which a disciple is a member. That is a group disciple, one of many, a group disciple. They can be a member of that group disciple, either an objective or a subjective member, or both. Such a disciple undergoes tests. Discipleship groups today are not devotees. So that's another difference between old age discipleship in the Piscean age, where we would see disciples or chelas of teachers sitting on the floor, in a lotus position, wrapped in a cloth that isolated themselves from their environment. It's just like they enclosed themselves in that lotus position, the cloth around them, and they shut themselves off from the environment. But like I said, a disciple is not an island unto themselves, and they are not devotees. So they're not devotees of a personality. They're not a devotee of dogmas and doctrines. They are devotees of knowledge. They are devotees of achievement, of transformation. They are devotees of sacrificial service. And listen to this, they are devotees of enlightenment. That is such a beautiful image in itself, because being a devotee of enlightenment inspires striving towards something greater than what we already are. To expand our consciousness in such a way that our knowledge is not based on knowledge that we learn from school, but comes from straight knowledge. And straight knowledge is resourced in the chalice, and it's resourced in the cosmic magnet, and it's resourced in the aura of the master. So that's why we are devotees to knowledge. Disciples today's discipleship groups are bridges between the objective and subjective world. They are bridges. So a discipleship group, or the group disciple, more importantly, the group disciple is a bridge between the fiery world and the subjective, objective world. When I think about fiery world, we must include the physical world, the astral world, the mental world, and the supramundane world. So the way I see it is that a disciple being a bridge means that they are not only self-aware, but they are awake on the physical, astral, mental planes of consciousness, have a bridge built between those levels of, or planes of existence, and the fiery and supermundane world. So there is a stream of energy that is flowing from above through or under the bridge out into the physical environment. This is why disciples are recognized by their creative activity, their creative actions. Discipleship groups, their intention is to penetrate the mysteries of nature, the mysteries of energy and life, and to prepare a bridge for humanity to also cross this bridge, and to cross the bridge in such a way that they too are now opened to a higher state of consciousness. The teaching of Agni Yoga will draw many disciples into its world community. And from that community, we'll find certain group disciples living a life of dedicated service to the hierarchy in the planet. To strive towards self-perfectment requires the disciple to undergo transformation. And this is where the tests of life come in. It is through transformation. It is through their day-to-day life. And it's like, this is interesting, as I was writing the talk for today, I had this image of a salmon. It's an old image. The salmon traveling upstream on the water or the river of life, and it seems like they are going against the flow of life instead of with the flow of life. Most people want to go with the flow of life, right? They want to be part of the popular masses. And the disciple, their lives, it almost seems to go in contradiction to that feeling of wanting to go with the flow. But from the moment they're born, like the salmon, a disciple fights their way upstream, determined to see the world. That is the path of the disciple, the path of the Agni Yogi. And this is why at some juncture of life in their striving towards self-perfectment and undergoing the test of transformation, they become, I use this word, labeled with the term world disciple. They're not comfortable staying in their little community. It's like we live here, the headquarters of White Mountain is headquartered in a very small mountainous community, which is beautiful. But if we did not reach out beyond this community, we would not know what's going on in the world today. Even despite TV and the internet and social media, we have to get in the car, drive down to Phoenix, hop the plane. It's such a to-deal. It's such a to deal with. Anyway, it is going to Europe. It is going to South America. It is going to other parts of the world because now they are prepared. They're not going to visit museums and statues, but they're going to other parts of the world to participate in other cultures and to bring the teaching of the great ones to these different cultures. Discipleship is taking responsibility for one's karma and recognizing one's incarnation on this planet as a school from which they want to graduate with honors. Transformation is the stage in which we change our consciousness. Therefore, our body form changes. Transform. Form is part of that word, transformation. And this form is going to change. Transformation means change of form. The person, their face can change. Their organs can change. They adapt themselves to this new level of consciousness. Eventually, their body will be an exact reflection of their consciousness, just as the bodies of the great masters are. Transformation also happens to the emotional body when the person no longer hates or gets angry because they have eliminated the corresponding emotional forms or elements. This is interesting about transformation on the mental plane. It starts with ugly thought forms that are not in accord with the highest vision of the disciple begins to change. Now, if you think about it, I'm trying to think what the word is. Some of us used to play around with taking an object and trying to get that object to move just kinetically through the strength of our thinking, trying to get that object to move. And we were just playing games. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. When it worked, we thought we were all powerful. But this is something that's a little bit different, but it gives us an idea, that game gave us an idea of just how difficult it is to change an ugly thought form. And the reason being is that ugliness permeates itself in other thoughts. And those thoughts affect our emotions, and the emotions affect the etheric body, which affects the energy of our glands and organs and cells and atoms. So, you can see that the disciple travels on the path of transformation, and it is logical to consider that the disciples, the discipleship groups, must undergo tests, spiritual tests that will help advance their consciousness in such a way that they can and will truly transform themselves. Disciples are those individuals who try to assimilate the teaching. And then once the assimilation takes place, they actualize it. They actualize it in their life. So a disciple sees life on the planet as a school. And we read this in the teachings, that it is a school from which we are to graduate. Life is going to present us many tests to make us realize our worth, our readiness, our weaknesses, and accordingly then gives us an opportunity to change our lives in such a way that we're now prepared for spiritual service and responsibilities. So if you're one of these people, you're going to realize certain things. For example, you will demonstrate selfless striving, perseverance. You'll be subject to certain probation tests. And if you are ready for a promotion, then it's going to happen. But these tests of probation are absolutely infused on this path that we are traveling. And we can't divert ourselves from these probationary tests. Tests are very important for us because only through such tests can we prove our worth to ourselves and also to the supervising teachers. And to be ready then, of course, to handle greater responsibilities. These tests are periods of probation where the testing can reveal any weaknesses that we may have, and also any potentials that we brought into this life to experience. So the disciple and teacher act accordingly to make the field of service more fruitful. Sometimes these periods of probation and testing are noticed by the disciple, and interestingly enough, sometimes they go through them without being aware that this is a test. Master Moria says, every 3 years we give the disciple the possibility of expressing himself in regard to some similar event. Now, if you know astrology, you can take certain Saturn cycles and these 3-year, 7-year, and 14-year, and 27-year cycles and mark them on your calendar, because these are the years you're going to be tested. And these tests repeat themselves, supposedly repeat themselves. But what's so cool is when we pass this test, then, how can I explain it? It's like the event now itself expands, just like our consciousness is expanding. That test now gets bigger and expands itself. So the next test, this next similar event, the test will be more intense and more challenging to see whether and how much we learned from the kindergarten test. So only to these dates may we see the fluctuation of ourselves, our cooperation, our patience, and devotion. So in the last, I've got about 5-10 minutes left. So in this last 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about what kind of tests that we may be exposed to. And the first test, which absolutely makes sense, is the test of relationships. This is why we are told, where the teaching tells us we can no longer go to the caves in the Himalayan mountains to achieve enlightenment, that we're going to achieve them right here, enlightenment right here, through our relationships. It is through the pressures of the disciples' environment, their personal or professional environment. It is through their studies and aspirations that they are going to change the forms of their relationship with people and with life in general. But even though these changes can be recognized objectively, they might remain the same subjectively or part of your inner life. For example, the disciple acts honestly as long as they know that people are watching them, but they do not act so honestly when they enter into the astral plane. So what does this indicate? This indicates that the teaching has not been absorbed in the higher planes by the disciple, and they have not actualized the higher principles in the subjective planes. So this is, I think, one of the reasons we have to go through these tests every 3, every 7, every 14, every 27 years, and sometimes more frequently, so that it gets our attention and we absorb it, just like a sponge, that we're absorbing the event. We understand the cause, we recognize the effects, and then it just becomes like part of the blood in our veins, so that now when we go through the kindergarten test, from kindergarten all the way through the initiate level of discipleship, now we can pass the test physically, astrally, mentally, and in the supermundane world. So, teachers will subject us to various tests, not just physically, but in the astral planes and lower mental and higher, even sometimes, not as often, but still in the higher planes periodically. They will watch us to see how we progress, to see how we have made or how we have fluctuated between these polarities. The teachers subject the disciple to various tests, like I said, in such a way so we can discover our realities and experience the process of transformation. Astral tests take place through dreams, wishes, and desires to see if the disciple is honest to the same degree as they are in the physical consciousness, or they are as detached or devoted in the astral consciousness as they are in the physical consciousness. Oh, there's so much I could talk about, but I shan't. Okay. In mental tests, the disciples' inner thoughts towards certain events are observed in order to see what degree of refinement they have reached in their thinking. Imagine having refined thinking. Daily, cyclically, or periodically, the disciple is tested to see if they have different feelings, different emotions, different actions and reactions to a similar event and to a similar object or within a similar relationship, both in the objective and subjective worlds. And of course, the quality of their thoughts to a situation or event, both in the objective and subjective worlds. To avoid excitement and artificial reactions and responses, the disciple oftentimes is not aware of these tests. But after many years of probation and an increasing awareness of these tests, often then will make the disciple more cooperative, more alert, and more striving. For a long time, the objective and subjective teachers relate to their disciples at a distance and want to remain unnoticed so as not to overstimulate the disciple and to lead them to mechanical or artificial responses. They want their disciple to grow by their inner power to sprout and conquer hindrances. They want the person to develop, this is interesting, to develop healing powers. So that's all that I've talked about here is regard to relationships. And now number 2, the second type of test. Eventually the disciple becomes aware of the test and becomes aware of the presence of the teacher, both subjectively and objectively, and their observing eyes. That's number 2. Number 3, and I made a list of tests that are related in this way, and I'll just try to quickly go through them without explanation. Tests that are related to the character, to our character, our self-image, our moral character will be tested. Our power of endurance and perseverance, our stability, our emotional stability, our emotional intelligence, which is something psychologists have come up with in the last few years, our emotional intelligence, our stability, our skill in service will be tested. Our diplomacy and wisdom will be tested. Our creativity and the quality of our creativity will be tested. Our sensitivity and intuition will be tested. The level of our subjective context, the level, that's the key word here, the level of our subjective context will be tested. Our subjective and objective memory will also be tested. Sensitivity to the impressions coming from higher sources will be tested. Our ability to stand under the pressures of labor will be tested. And finally, our ability and skill in handling attacks. So that's quite a list. But if some of you are taking notes, and I would recommend you do that unless you have photographic memory. This will help you be aware and help you cooperate when you undergo these tests, just by knowing them. Be aware of them. So as the disciple advances, they realize that their life as a whole is set in such a way that it is a path of tests. They can see that the people around them, their body, emotions, thoughts, events, and all that compose their life are nothing else but well-organized series of tests. The growth, creativity, and usefulness of the disciple are forged by their ability to pass through these tests. Tests in honesty, tests in nobility, tests in fearlessness, with the faith that the divinity in them will eventually reach the crown of glory. Now, the crown of glory is a state of beingness. It's a state of beingness which the disciple commits themselves to a service on an international level. That's the crown of beingness. They are tested, they are trusted, they are tempered to go into the complicated, stormy, intricate field of world service and share their achievements with all those who have made themselves ready for the path. For disciples, the nature of their tests changes periodically. Periodically, they are subjected even to tests of happiness, success, victory, position, worship, and devotion, to see how much they have grown to be indifferent to these traps. Tests have common goals, and I'm bringing this to an end now. Tests have common goals. All these tests have a common goal: to encourage us to be a useful, tempered, and a trustworthy servant in the divine plan. We learn on this path of tests and trials, success and failure, the power of detachment. And when I talk about detachment, this is something I wish, as spiritual students, particularly in the Agni Yoga community, you really think about what detachment is, because I see a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is oftentimes recognized in the lack of feeling, or the lack of emotion, or the lack of caring, even sometimes the lack of compassion in the disciple. And it's not that they are not compassionate, it's not that they are not feeling or not caring. It is that they have frozen that part of themselves, thinking that this is detachment. And if you've ever been around, and I've been around so many disciples like this, I just hurt for them, because they will have to come back and start all over again with the test of detachment. See, a disciple can cry. I remember the last meeting that my teacher held of his membership, and in which he announced and told everybody he was dying. And as he was saying goodbye to us, he cried. See, this is not attachment. This is feeling. This is compassion. He went through all these tests with us, and in his tears, we were baptized. So that's how I see when people cry. When a disciple cries, it's a test of baptism, not just for themselves, but for those of us that are blessed by being in their environment. So that's detachment. The more the disciple increases this transformational power, the closer they come to their true self, and the greater fusion that they achieve with the all self. So you've learned some today about tests on the path of life. And hopefully it will now make a difference through the rest of your years, that you'll become more aware, more awake, that particularly in advancing discipleship, that every element of your life pertains to some level of a test in some way. And that list that I gave you, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12. And within that 12, there were multiple words. So if you didn't get to write all of those ideas down or those types of tests, let me know and I'll email it to you.